A reinforced concrete bunker that could stop a bunker-busting bomb at the end of a runway. Seriously. And not only that, but a second concrete wall behind that one. This is something the entire aviation world is puzzled by because its stupidity is only surpassed by the fact that it was ever installed anywhere near an airport runway. So I'm going to tell you why the passengers who lost their lives in the crash of Jeju Air Flight 2216 did not die in an accident or the crash. That's right. These people were murdered. Yes, I said they were murdered. They were killed by whoever authorized, designed, and built the Muan International Airport. And I'm going to tell you why next on Maximus.
This is Maximus Aviation.
Greetings, everybody. A very sad Maximus here. I'm not going to waste a lot of time with fluff and get right to the subject at hand. Because only 3 days on the heels of an Azerbaijan Airlines passenger jet getting mistakenly shot down by Russia on Christmas Day, sadly live on our TVs, our phones, and in horrific high definition, we all witnessed another tragedy that didn't have to happen. Regardless of the cause of Jeju Air Flight 2216's engine trouble, whether it were birds or a mechanical failure, it really doesn't matter. Because the crew of that flight executed a pretty good, albeit high-speed belly landing, and everybody probably should have survived. I'm not a professional pilot, and I'm not going to get into the aviator side of things. I did see Juan Brown on the Blancolirio channel did have a good breakdown from his angle, so after you watch this video, go check that out. However, it doesn't take a professional pilot to see what the main cause of this tragedy really was. As for the landing, there was no fire, very few sparks, and we've seen so many belly landings like this throughout the history of aviation, there are too many to count. And for all the grief we give the FAA and the NTSB here in the U.S., there at times lack of oversight of Boeing, for example, and those are serious flaws in our system. But I think it's important that we recognize the fact that, flaws and all, the U.S. FAA and overall aircraft safety record is among the best anywhere in the world. So credit where credit is due. However, the crash that just claimed nearly 200 lives in South Korea was a completely survivable belly landing. Sure, there may have been some injuries, maybe a fire, even some fatalities. Okay, so that brings me to the question of today. What the hell happened in South Korea? And how can I possibly call the accident a murder? Well, that's easy. Because at the very least, it was manslaughter or negligent homicide by more than just one South Korean government official or agency. Muan International Airport in Muan County, South Korea, began construction in 1997, and the airport opened on November 9, 2007. Now keep that 97 start date in mind. I'll get back to that in a minute. And as far as opening in 2007, well, it might as well be considered a brand new airport. But what was happening back in the United States in 1996, a year before Muan began construction on their new international airport? I'll tell you that in a second too. But if you've flown anywhere in the U.S. in the last 3 decades, I'm sure you're familiar with EMAS. If not by name, then you've seen it. EMAS stands for Engineered Materials Arresting System, and the first EMAS system was installed in 1996 at New York's JFK International Airport on runways 04 right and 22 left. And here is where that 1996 date comes in, because that was a full year, like I said, before construction began on the new Muan International Airport. EMAS was developed in response to a 1984 Scandinavian Airlines DC-10 incident at JFK, where the plane overran the runway and caused extensive damage and injuries. EMAS is a system of crushable material placed on the end of a runway to help stop an aircraft that overruns the runway. The material absorbs the kinetic energy of the aircraft, slowing it down faster than open spaces would. A standard EMAS can bring a plane to a complete stop if it enters the EMAS area at 70 knots or less. The first actual EMAS save occurred at JFK on May 8, 1999, when a Saab 340 commuter aircraft overran the runway. EMAS was developed in the mid-1990s by ESCO Engineering Arresting Systems Corporation, now Runway Safe Incorporated, in collaboration with the FAA, the University of Dayton, and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. According to the FAA's Office of Airports has helped facilitate runway safety area, or RSA, improvements at more than 500 commercial service airports in the U.S. This means that all practicable improvements, including the use of EMAS technology, have been made at approximately 1,000 runways at these airports. These RSAs have been improved to full standards or to the extent practical, including the relocation of FAA-owned navigational equipment. That's the large ILS antenna that was attached to that stupid giant concrete bunker in South Korea. Moving those antennas was another innovative solution. However, as a result of the success in addressing commercial service airport RSA or runway safety areas, the Office of Airports has started similar strategies to improve general aviation RSAs across the U.S. I'll scroll a list of aircraft that have been saved by EMAS over the years while I talk. However, as far as outside the United States goes, remarkably, the EMAS system is only in use at 15 airports worldwide. Oh, and by the way, I'll get to this soon, but Muan Airport indeed had a primitive form of this EMAS at the other end of the same runway. But the International Civil Aviation Organization, the ICAO, does not have specific regulations requiring EMAS installation on runways internationally. They only provide guidelines and recommendations regarding runway safety areas. Instead, the ICAO leaves the decision largely up to individual countries and their aviation authorities to decide. Presently, as of December 2024, there are 15 airports outside the United States that use Engineered Materials Arresting Systems, or EMAS, including 2 in China, 2 in Madrid, Spain, 1 in Taipei, Taiwan, 2 in Norway, 1 in Saudi Arabia, 1 in Switzerland, 3 in overseas departments of France, 1 in Japan, 1 in Germany, and 2 in Brazil. Why? It's really puzzling. However, after this week, I imagine the world is going to rethink this option. However, with all that said, the EMAS system wasn't even needed to prevent this tragedy that just occurred in South Korea, except for that wall. Every airport has its ILS localizer antenna array installed at the end or the beginning of a runway. And while they're made of steel or aluminum, many are indeed embedded in a base of concrete for stability. However, the concrete base is like level with the ground. It's flush, so planes, should they fly over them or collide into them, can go over them easily. And not only that, the antennas themselves are made to break away, to cause less damage should it happen, because it has happened in the past, and it will happen again. But those antennae and their bases are specifically designed to limit damage and injury due to such an event, because they have happened in the past and they will happen again. Okay, so then if in my scenario we're going to hold some entity accountable for murder or manslaughter, who is it? Well, here are my questions. 1. Who was the person who designed or considered this an option in the first place? I mean, seriously, which government agency or agent signed off on this? Also, second, knowing that the giant bunker was at the end of the runway with a pilot declaring an emergency, why not bring the plane in on the same runway, but in the opposite direction? Specifically because looking at this picture, this aerial view of Muan Airport, you can clearly see that at the opposite end of the same runway, there appears to be some sort of EMAS, or at the very least a primitive overrun safety feature at the end of that runway. So why not bring them in that way? Plus, there's a generous amount of space beyond that in case of an emergency runway overshoot. This would have been a much safer option. So what the hell were aircraft controllers thinking? Okay, that brings me to my next question. How many airport employees, safety personnel, or controllers even knew that the bunker holding the ILS antenna had a massive concrete barricade underneath? If not, why not? Next, where was the foam on the runway? The common procedure for a belly landing of that sort is for fire rescue to pre-foam the runway to negate the possibility of fire. Oh, and speaking of fire, why weren't the fire trucks already on the runway? The pilot declared an emergency landing. That's usually the procedure for the fire equipment to meet the airplane as it lands. So none of this makes any sense. It's not North Korea where they live in the Stone Age. This is South Korea, one of the safest countries for aviation historically, and not to mention all the technology that has been born out of South Korea over the decades. Are you telling me nobody thought this was a bad idea? None of this makes any sense whatsoever. So the only answer you can conclude is 100% absolute premeditated negligence on the part of anybody and everybody involved in the construction of this airport design. 200 people didn't have to die. even after a terrifying emergency high-speed belly landing? In my opinion, the only answer is, like I said, premeditated negligence. And in the U.S. and most of the world, when you take a human life as a result of willful negligence, thus you're guilty of murder. Now multiply that by almost 200 people. That makes it mass murder in my book. I know. Sounds serious. Am I over the top here? Let me know. We know there are going to be lawsuits for years, that's a given. But I think people need to be criminally charged and go to prison for this blatant act of neglect. Do I sound angry or upset? Yeah, well, that's because I am. And you should be too, and of course, I think I know you are. This should have never happened and should never happen again. Anyway, so that's my rant on the subject. But what do you think? Am I overreacting? Am I being too critical? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know down below. Well, for this new year, sadly, it won't be a happy one for many of the victims' families. But I want to wish you all a happy new year. I hope you had a very Merry Christmas. Please stay safe, stay healthy, hug somebody you love. And until next time, maybe next year, remember, this is Maximus.